Well, hello everyone. It is a frosty morning in North Dakota. Um, we're getting to our normal weather state of just frozen. And, you think things slow down here, but, everyone got field work done for the most part. And, Thanksgiving's over. It kind of sets into the ways of, okay, what's next? And everyone's kind of shifting. And right now it's okay. You got you really got 2 weeks left before the holidays to do anything. If you haven't lived in the kind of the ag business world of things, everyone's rushing to close deals right now. Like everyone's in a panic basically because well, like everyone's frozen just as the beautiful flat tundra that I live in. Uh it's really stressful out there for a lot of ag businesses. And, yes, farmers too, because they're like, yeah, what do we do? And markets and blah, blah, blah. I've talked about that, and there's plenty to talk about there. But from the ag business side, everyone's scared to spend money right now. So for all my good old ag tech friends and plenty that I've talked to from all sides of the aisle, they're all kind of like, oh shit, you know, where everyone's just hesitant on renewing contracts or especially adding more, but many are saying, yeah, we're going to reduce this, but trying to get an answer, trying to get that check before the end of the year or something. I lived my life, my most of my life around that with our ag business. December was always very very stressful. And things just took forever to get an answer. And sometimes things would work, sometimes it didn't. Um, anyways, so for all you out there that are feeling this pressure, I hear you. I've been there way too many times. It's not a good feeling. And, I think it's from all sides, even from the small ag businesses and, of course, my ag tech groups, they're begging for something or begging for answers, on whether someone's going to, you know, go forward or not. And yeah, there's a little hope, that maybe in the new year some things get refreshed, but then nothing really starts till the middle of January, anyways. So basically, you have 2 weeks to make sure you survive a month if you're in certain situations, and some people are in those situations. Um, or they know that they have to get something going, or January is going to be even worse, and February is going to be even worse, and then it's like finally like last minute in the spring, someone makes a decision. They open up their pocketbooks a little bit, say, we want to do this, and nothing is set up right. And then everything is rushed and nothing gets done properly. And whatever you're selling them doesn't work as well. And then they come back right after that and they're like, oh, well, it didn't really work. And it's just like the stupid cycle continues. And I would say, you know, and this week's a good week to maybe talk about this. One of the worst offenders of this is Ag Retail. Um, for one, they are very closed up with their budgets right now. Um, I'm not selling anything directly to them right now, and just because I'm not, they're very indecisive. And this week is the ARA convention, the Ag Retail Association, their annual meeting and get together, little trade show. I've actually never been. Why? That's a really stupid question to answer. I really don't even know. Probably because, as I said before, usually December was a really tough month, and traveling there and spending that money doing, floor booth, especially in my, the good old family business days, wasn't always possible. Or sometimes we just wasn't really who we were really going after. We're going after the kind of the larger national entities. Sometimes, yeah, just a little bit of ag retail, but that's a phone call. I don't have to go to a conference to figure that one out necessarily. But anyways, This week will be interesting because I know a lot of ag tech groups go into the ARA, and plenty do, but I think this year even more so because they're trying to beg and convince ag retail before the end of the year to make a decision and open up some money, or at least say like, yes, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, or at least begging for hope that one of them is like, yeah, we really need to do this. And you know, while there are plenty other, ways to sell some of these products for some of these groups, for the size of the checks, and most ag tech is B2B right now. It's not really B2C. There's a few trying that, but that's a whole different, story. This week might determine a lot of their futures, um, because figuring out what people think in a down market or down feeling or kind of a depressed market in ag is that can really showcase what your whole entire next year is. A lot, especially for a lot of these ag tech groups, they don't know where else to go. There's not many large organizations that have the funds to write enough of a big check where you can survive. Getting little, $500, $1,000 checks from individual users and farmers, or smaller other businesses. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's not it's the right thing to go after, but sometimes it's a lot easier to convince one ag retailer to pay 100 grand than convincing 100 people to pay $1,000. That's just the freaking truth. So this week's gonna be really interesting because there's gonna be a lot of people pushing and probably making deals that you know maybe barely cover their costs, but it pays the bills, and that is it's a tough spot to be in. And then there's a lot of these ag businesses and ag retailers are like, gosh, I don't want to see these groups fail. I see promise in them, but and you might have that internal person that's there, that one, rep, uh, that's like all for you. It's like, yeah, we want to use your tech and we want your data, or I do, I really like it and I see value, and some of my other guys see value, but getting that up the chain, getting the check actually written is, that's another thing. You maybe can get some sort of deals done this week, or the attempt to, and you might even, get approved, or maybe you're on your way to get there. Then getting the check takes 3 months or 6 months through procurement, and you're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. And this is a reality. Everyone's dealt with this that's been on kind of this side of my world. I can tell you that. It's frustrating. It's really tough. So I guess for any of you ag retailers that are listening to this, I know that's not going to change. It's not up to you. It's up to the process. You can't change that process. Accounting won't change that process for a large ag retailer. They just won't. I guess the best thing I can say is be honest. If you are trying to make these deals, or if someone is, begging you for this or giving you a deal you can't pass up on, just be real with them. Maybe they know already. If it's some new up and comer trying to get into your doors, just be realistic. Be like, hey, I love your stuff, but nothing's happening. Like, just talk to you in 6 months. And just let them be. Just give them the truth. Don't sugarcoat it. Just say, sorry, it's just not happening. If they're like, well, what about one location or one trial? Be like, I don't know. Depends on your situation, where you're at, what you can do. But just don't drag them along. Don't drag us ag tech people along with your hopes and your still pretty big budgets that right now are basically locked because you don't know what's going to happen. Like I said, just be honest. And for all you ag tech people out there at ARA, yeah, I don't know. I guess push as hard as you can, but be realistic and make sure you're not betting everything on just trying to get something done with ag retail, because let's step back here a little too. Is I've been questioning this more and more, and I've talked to a few others around this too. Is so a lot of things around, anything ag tech are around some agronomic decision, you know, or managing agronomic decisions or something. I've uh, I've been questioning whether ag retail should even deal with agronomy much, or if at all. I think farmers are actually waking up to this, saying, why are we getting agronomic recommendations from a group that makes money predominantly on selling us the inputs that we want to potentially reduce, that they make money on and sell these services towards? The big talk, early on in all this precision ag agronomy, what, was, reduce costs, improve efficiencies, increase yield. Good old story, and everyone claims they can do X, Y, and Z. And sure, that is possible. It's not like broad, it can work everywhere. It's so dependent on a situation, the field, how for some farms, what equipment they have, what products they're using. And then it kind of got into, well, we're probably just going to spend the same amount of money. We're just going to put it in the right places. And I think that was a big push by Ag Retail once they got more to the agronomic side of things, because they're like, oh, we could use this data and these software tools as a thing to kind of lock in what they're doing, because we can kind of show like, hey, you should be doing 100 pounds here, 200 pounds there, whatever. But they're getting the same amount. And they're like, oh, we can charge you $10 an acre, something extra. And that's been the trope. And a lot of guys are like, well, this isn't really doing me anything. Or maybe it was, but they couldn't really see because the ag retail groups of the ground weren't really proving what they were doing worked or not. They're kind of just using it as another sales and marketing tactic. And I'm not saying all year like this. I'm not saying that. I'm saying as a whole, it definitely feels that way. And of course, those agronomy programs really don't make a lot of money, if any of them make money. They're just used as a kind of a loss leader to keep farmers engaged into their, selling cycles and processes. I've heard that from many, many people, and I've felt it myself. And it's not everywhere though. It's all over the place, but I'd say more Corn Belt and South, places like that. I don't see it as much up in my area of the woods. Why? I don't know. That's The retailers up here are smaller, and they're a little more regionally focused, so they have a limit of how much they can piss everyone off. Anyways, but that's the thing. And now when the outlook is not great, like just uniformly everywhere, farmers are starting to question a lot more things. They're starting to say, okay, I just need to get my hands into this a little more because this isn't making sense. They might hear a neighbor or a friend be like, they reduced their fertility by 50% and got the same yields. And they didn't put like anything in these poor areas because we've just been pouring stuff on. Farmer friend of mine just said the other day when we were on a like ag trip around here, tourism trip, educational trip, that he hasn't put phosphorus on his ground in 5 years, and his levels are the same, and he's doing some different things. He's like, yeah, why? When that's working, and he tried it, and then it just kind of expanded to it. It's not saying he won't put on any. It's just he's basically reduced it by a giant amount. And then I've been seeing other people put out tests from independent agronomists, and whether they're using some special crazy product or what, they're trying new things. They're challenging the status quo. They're challenging the rates that universities have put out for years, that ag retail and those kind of larger agronomic models have said, well, we'll just do this. That's what worked last year. We'll just do it again, right? You'll just buy the same chemical, same amount of fertilizer, blah, blah, blah. Tweak it a little bit. How does that sound? We'll just write the check, right? Well, farmers are having a tough time, maybe some of them even being able to write a check regardless. So they're like, well, I got to rethink this. And then they need to justify why they can reduce it without feeling tormented by the decision. And as I've talked about before, is half the reason why farmers will pay for a service or for like an agronomist or crop consultant to make a decision for them so they can sleep at night. So they don't have that burden on themselves. Well, that's happening more and more. And I think it's starting to question for ag retail whether they should even play this game. Because for a lot of them, it's like I said, it's a loss leader. One giant ag retailer I know said they were in the black for the first time ever doing this stuff. And they've been doing it for 20 plus years. It's like the program always lost money, but it was to make the top guys that like this stuff happy. And they needed something to make them happy, else they would, spend money somewhere else. They would reduce costs somewhere else. Anyway, it's a fickle game. I don't know if there's some perfect way to go about it, but this is why I think maybe ag retail needs to really rethink how they work with agronomy. And with that, that'll change their whole perception of how they deal with ag tech. I think ag retail would probably be a lot more successful if they concentrated less on outward decisions for farmers and looked at inward decisions on how they even operate. Maybe it's still using some of that ag tech data or, understanding how farmer farms and fields are fields and how they react, how they yield, all that stuff, all the logistics, the metrics. That's where your cost savings are. That's where your best bang for the buck probably is. I gotta let the dogs in. Hold on. It's clear outside. They could have crossed my sashes. Anyway, so it makes me think, and I've always maybe kind of thought this is the real role where tech fits has always been with the independent agronomists. And if you're creating tools that support them, that is your best bet because they're independent. They are selling a service and want repeat service, and they're not selling you inputs or chemicals. And there is some, so mind you, there are some ag retailers that are, while they might sell you certain products, they do vet them, they test them. I've even crap about sales agronomists. Some sales agronomists because all they care about is just selling whatever product is given to them and pushing that out there because they're told to do it. That's a thing. But there are some sales agronomists that actually really dig into it. That's what they're called, but they really dig into the trials and the data and the information. And while they do sell those products, they might, their only reason they're selling those products is because they believe in them because they've actually vetted them and tested them. And I think that's valid. I think that's a fine way to do it. That's half the reason why farmers hire these groups is they're like, I don't know how to make sense of all this other crap. I got all these other decisions and all this other crap to deal with. If you're doing the research and you're going through it and you provide me, correct information about what's going on, then I'll trust that. And it might be a local person and that they know and be known for all their lives. You're like, yeah, okay. You've validated it. You've shown me that you validated it. Well, I'll trust that validation. Those types of ag retailers can stick into agronomy, and those usually are smaller ones, I would say. So maybe for the most part on the agronomic side, maybe just the larger ones need to be like really rethink their position. And the larger they are, the more logistical challenges they're going to have, and the more information they're going to have about how they decide how they just operate. It might make more sense for them to concentrate on how they logistically operate their sprayer fleet and how they look at where, maybe from remote sense data, like I know, and to look at more fields and farming operations that have a higher likelihood of using that for whatever reasons. There's a lot of ways to think about that. And using that agronomic data, not to make the agronomic decision, but to how to market their service and where to market their service and provide them that extra level of detail saying, we could give you a special deal if we just do all of your spraying for you. And if you do it now, yeah, we'll give you a special rate, blah, blah, blah. And, guarantee X. Because we have the biggest, baddest new sprayers. Well, you, ex-farmer, it's for those mid-level, smaller ones, like, you don't have that. And speed and logistics. You have other things to deal with. And, like, looking into their operations of how they work, less about really the agronomic decision. A lot of ways to think about that. I'm just talking concepts and ideas here, so there is no one tried and true method, but I think it would be better for large ag retail to create almost their own sort of, working with other, regional independents and making almost like a pact with them of sorts instead of having to deal with all of that yourself. Having all these people everywhere. Man, that's why you can reduce costs. Not producing people, but maybe those people that are there create their own independent agronomy companies. And you're like, yeah, well, here's an example. You might have XYZ sales agronomists, quotations there, always doing recommendations and all this, but you don't really need them to sell the product. There's other people that are just pure like salespeople, and then some just buy online. It's just saying, yeah, this is what worked. You know what to buy. Say, you know what? We think there's a different opportunity. Why don't you, if they have their right qualifications, why not, instead of working for us, you become independent, have your own business, and those acres and those customers that you worked with, like, we are going to let you deal with that. You expand however you want, into whatever territories, but you're going to get that. That's what you handled. You did it well, but we're just trying to take the risk off us because we want to get more of, like I said, internal logistical things that can help us and save us time and money and effort. And you can really do what you need to do, what you're good at. And you can kind of, there's a transition. Maybe they were with, kind of create a club almost. It's like, we're number, fifth biggest ag retailer, and we're not doing internal agronomy anymore. We're going to farm that out to all these independents out there. Here's where our, you set up budget for what you're providing. Or maybe not even that. It's like, here's our acres, like bid for it. Something like that. I think that would be good. I think it would get more people into becoming independent agronomists. And I think those independent agronomists would think a little more clear on their process. This is where I do think there is a good marriage between some of these new AI tools, is maybe that local independent agronomist can start creating his own kind of models and processes in the area where that wasn't really maybe really possible or feasible with the software he was forced to use through the Ag Retail. That is, as I've talked before, it's good enough to do the broad things on a large scale, but it doesn't do the intricacies. And they can kind of build their own world around it. And maybe they still plug into those bigger things, but they're not using them directly as the channel. And I think that could reduce a lot of stress on a lot of ways. It kind of helps build up others and creating their own thing, but it also creates some stickiness between that relationship. That's one idea. Maybe they just get out all together and say, we're just not dealing with it. And we're just not, because there's all these other challenges and I think liability is another big thing. I've talked about that. Is do we actually look at the liability side of what these agronomic decisions are being made? Are they just like, oh, well, they're just this because that's just the way they are? It's like, well, what if you're wrong? An independent agronomist is going to go a little deeper into the why and whatnots, where that maybe that sales agronomist won't as much because that individual is not as liable. And there's like, well, the bigger one is. Then no one does anything, no one thinks of it. It just kind of happens, and everyone kind of gets pissed off, but no one really knows what to do, and everyone's kind of stuck. So, anyways, I think, I'm focusing on this kind of problem, like I said, this week because of the ARA meeting. Now, another way to think about this too is, okay, say what I'm saying, gets into some minds, and they're like, oh yeah, maybe we should do that. That's a good idea. Hey, we listened to Nathan's newsletter and podcast or whatever video, depending on what I do this week, and say things like, yeah, we thought that would be a good idea, and oh geez, maybe we're gonna rethink it that way. Well, for your ag tech groups, maybe you have to get the ag retail's attention, propose a different kind of process to them, something that is unique, different, that you haven't approached with your sales cycle and your marketing. And I've talked about this before in ways that it's like there's different ag tech things that do different things. Trying to be everything for everybody doesn't really work really well. Only a few can really do it, and the few that do don't really do it really well anyways. Maybe you have to make some unique partnerships with some other ag tech groups and create your own little consortium. Be like, I know this group, this group. We're going to look all together and we're going to provide you a quote and saying we can do this, this, and this, and this. Even some of the ag retailers that are searching for changes right now and feeling a little stuck, as I've talked about a few weeks ago, that got a lot of interest. That's what they're probably going to do anyways. Yeah, they might have their base big software thing that kind of controls and handles some of those larger logistical challenges. But if they are going to stick into some of the agronomic things, or they want to grab data to use to help benefit the farmer in some way, yeah, they're going to have to use a lot of other little things and a lot of other vendors, and they might pit the vendors against each other. That's kind of the thought process. That's what they do. Well, why not work with those other vendors so they can't do that? So they cannot pit against you, and you can come in together. It's like, no, it's us, group of 5. We all do our things this way. Yeah, we have some crossover, but for you, we're going to focus on these things with you. This is what our bulk charge is. You're not going to pit us against each other so that we reduce our cost to almost nothing for a free trial or a free test or some stupid fucking pilot that does nobody any good. Pilots are terrible. I don't know, for the most part. I hate pilots. Like, see the product, do it, pay for what it is. There's value to that. And this nickel and diming by everybody is just terrible. There's value in all these things, but sometimes you get stuck. You want to pay the bill, you give the deal. I get it. And as an ag retailer, you're trying to say, well, I want to get something done. I want to help this group, but I can only do this much. Let's run a pilot. I can get 10 grand for you. It's like, oh God, pilot. The pilot might cost actually more internally for that ag tech company to run it. But they got to pay bills anyways. And in a sense, it's like, well, I'd rather have a 10 grand check than a $0 check. Even though it's going to cost me a little bit later, I'll figure that out some other way. That's farming in general too. So with all these things said, I'm going to end on all that. And mainly I'm hoping any of you at that conference, or if you're not, you're just in this space, to kind of think through the process a little more than just sitting to your laurels of what you've always done. If ag retail, if you want to do something different, I don't know, put your damn brains together and figure it out and talk with the groups in ag tech about what's possible. And all you ag tech guys, stop trying to sell the same way. figure out new ways, put the thinking cap on, work together with others. I don't know. If you don't do these things, then none of it's going to work for anybody, and everyone's just going to be stale, and no one's going to succeed, and everything's just going to fall apart. So there's my hope. Try to figure it out. Try to be nice to each other. Hopefully some checks can get written for people so they can stay around and continue. But it's the holidays. It's coming. Or it's here. It's a weird time of year. Ag is in a weird cycle. But there is hope. There always is. You just got to think a little differently, act a little differently. So here's my 2 cents for the week. Always more to come. We'll see you next time.